Maybe the last time we talked about it. So we'll discuss that today. But before we jump into the meeting, I just want to reconfirm with our working group coordinator, Courtney, that we have a quorum. Do we have a quorum?
We do, Mayor Dedina. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'd like to update the members and public on our process for both member and public comments. The primary members will be using the cameras and we will take live public comments. Members are asked to turn on their cameras or raise their hands when they have a comment or question, and then I will recognize you to speak. And as always, Courtney or no, Keith, I need help on that, just to making sure I can coordinate who's talking and who needs to ask questions. So maybe Courtney, you can ask people to talk based on hands raised. If you don't mind. Great, thank you so much. And then Courtney will now provide a quick reminder on how the public comments will work. Please take it away, Courtney.
Thank you, Mayor Dedina. So in addition to emailing comments, the public may also provide live comments during today's meeting. In order to provide live comments, you can join by the meeting today via the Zoom link or by dialing one of the numbers from the phone that are provided on the cover page of today's meeting agenda. When the public comments are called for on an item, if on the Zoom platform, click on the raise hand function icon in the Zoom toolbar on the top right-hand corner of your screen. The chair will call on you by the name you have provided, or I will be calling on you. If you are participating by telephone, press *9 on your telephone to indicate your desire to speak. The chair will call on you by the last 4 digits of your telephone number, and then you will press *6 to unmute. All comments, whether emailed or live, will be made as part of today's meeting record. And that concludes my instructions.
Great. Well, thanks. We'll get started with the meeting. Unfortunately, one of the best moments of the live meetings was just everybody introducing themselves, and because it's a who's who of coastal management and protection. So that was nice, but we're not going to do that today since we're in a virtual environment. But I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for joining us. And on one note, I just saw Daniel Swain at UCLA posted that we're now in a full La Nina for this summer. So for those of you who got tired of colder water as we went into the spring, colder than it was in January, apparently that's not over. So anyway, with that, I will move on to item number 2, approval of meeting minutes. And the Shoreline Preservation Working Group is asked to review and approve minutes from its March 3rd, 2022 meeting. And are there any public comments first on this item? If so, please raise your hands.
I do not see any raised hands.
Any member comments on that? I know it's an exciting meeting that I missed. I saw about it in the paper, which was good.
I don't see any raised hands.
Can we get a motion to approve this item, please? Any takers?
Motion to approve. This is Kelly Hinsey.
Thank you, Kelly. Is there a second?
Yeah, second from Donovan.
Thank you. And I have a motion by Councilmember Hinsey and then a second by Councilmember Donovan Coronado. I will call on Courtney for the roll call vote, please.
Thank you, Mayor Dedina. So City of Imperial Beach, Mayor Dedina.
Yes.
City of Del Mar, Councilmember Gasterlin.
Yes.
City of Carlsbad, Councilmember Pahat Patel.
Aye.
City of Coronado, Mike Donovan, Councilmember Donovan.
Coronado, yes.
City of Encinitas, Councilmember Hinsey.
Yes.
City of National City, Councilmember Bush.
Yes.
City of Oceanside, Deputy Mayor Kine.
Yes.
City of Solana Beach, Deputy Mayor Becker.
Yes.
And I believe those are all the members present for today's meeting.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Sounds like we got that taken care of. And so now we'll move on to item number 3, the public comments and communications from members. I'll ask members of the public who wish to offer public comment not related to a matter on today's agenda to please raise your hand at this time so we can call on you. Are there any public comments?
Mike Hastings has his hand raised. I have now promoted you to talk. And I believe you're still muted, Mike.
Sorry about that. Still a learning in process. I do have a comment, but it is on an agenda item. Should I wait until that agenda item's discussed or during public comment specifically?
No, yeah, wait till it's an agenda item, Mike. And
Okay,
then,
thank you.
yeah, I'll make sure we'll obviously just raise your hand again and we'll call on you.
Sounds good. Thank you for the clarification.
Any other additional member comments? I mean, public comments, then we'll go to member comments.
I do not see any other raised hands.
Great. Any member comments on issues not on the agenda?
Can you see my hand?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. It's Esther Sanchez, Mayor for City of Oceanside. We recently had a meeting of the Joint Powers Authority for the Buena Vista Lagoon, and we are working on the restoration project. And one of the things that came up with in terms of our project, which we are working towards with Keith Greer, helping to get the funds together to make it a shovel-ready project. One of the things that we talked about and that Mayor Matt Hall from Carlsbad brought up was, well, perhaps what we could also do is start addressing what will happen with the sand at the mouth of the lagoon, and talking about it as a regional project, and perhaps even somehow getting this as part of the Buena Vista Lagoon project. So that is something really exciting. We are definitely for a regional solution to the preservation of sand on our beaches. We are also going to be, we're also in the process of forming the Mayor's Committee, the North Coastal Mayor's Committee. That's really exciting. And this is going to be certainly one of the things that we talk about. So I'm excited to bring this up at this level as well. And I see that it's not on the agenda for today, but the next meeting, I guess, will be in September. So hopefully we'll have something more solidly at that time. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Sanchez. Really, really great news.
Yes.
I think that fits in the second item. We talk about potentially regional projects. So it's great. Any opportunity for people to get together and talk about this work regionally is really appreciated. And I think it's the way it's going to happen. So that's excellent. And it longstanding tradition of doing that in North County anyway, in San Diego. So great. Any additional member comments? Are there, Courtney?
I just had a few announcements, but
Oh, that's right.
I wanted to let
you.
members
Thank you very
speak
much.
if
Thanks,
they had
Courtney.
any.
Good.
Yes,
Go ahead.
no, I wanted to let members speak first if they had any comments. So just two quick little small things is first, thank you all for having me here today. And it's going forward, it seems that we're using the Outlook calendar appointment to schedule for today's meeting worked well with everybody. So that's what I will be using going forward. So after today's meeting, you will be receiving an Outlook calendar invite for the September 1st meeting. And then second, I just wanted to give a quick reminder. Anna Van did announce this at the last working group meeting, but just a reminder that we are working on renewing the MOUs with the coastal jurisdictions to continue consultant shoreline monitoring works. And as of right now, the MOUs are set to expire on June 30th, and we will be extending that to June 30th of 2024. To also then include the fiscal years 23 and 24 costs. So please be aware of these timely MOUs coming through in your email and work with Sandac staff to execute them quickly. And that concludes all my announcements.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions? Thanks, Courtney. And are there any questions or comments on that from members? Just on the, okay, MOUs. Great, well then that will move on to item number 4, the working group restructuring and draft task force charter update. And Keith will give that update. Take it away, Keith.
Thanks, Chair Dedina, and good morning, almost afternoon for the working group members. So item 4 on your agenda is an informational item on the charter for the Shoreline Preservation Task Force. You may recall that I presented at your January meeting on the move by Sandag to reduce the number of working groups and the desire to identify specific technical task force that relate to specific technical themes, such as in this case, shoreline preservation. So we'll have task force related to like goods movement. We'll have task force related to specific projects. In this case, we want to have a task force that's related to shoreline preservation and looking at that at a regional level. At your March meeting, I presented a draft charter for the Shoreline Preservation Task Force. This task force will replace the Shoreline Preservation Working Group starting the new fiscal year, which for Sandag starts on July 1st. So we had a discussion at your March meeting. We took that discussion and we put it into the charter, which you'll have before you here as item number 4. And today I'm presenting the final draft of the Shoreline Preservation Task Force itself. The key takeaways are the task force will have the same look and feel for the members as the Shoreline Preservation Working Group. The responsibilities identified in the charter for the task force are the same as those responsibilities identified in the Preservation Working Group itself. We will still meet quarterly. The first meeting will be on September 1st. I prefer to do this in person. I'm getting very sick of Zoom meetings, like many of you probably are. We've also talked about possibly having that September 1st meeting be at one of the local jurisdictions to start highlighting some of the projects that are going on in the region. The meeting will comply with the Brown Act. The task force membership will not change from the current working group, with the exception of the Department of Boating Waterways is now a division of the State Park and Recreation. And they've already, State Park and Recreation already represented on the working group and will be recommended in the task force itself. In discussions with the Department of Boating, with the Division of Boating Waterways, they're going to be a granting agency on the item that we'll talk about in item number 5. And they asked not to be on the task force because they perceive it as a conflict of interest, which makes a lot of sense. So they'll still be invited to attend these working group meetings as a member of the public, but they asked not to be on the task force itself. There are no other changes to the membership. Elected officials can still be representatives from their jurisdiction. And again, it will be Brown Act, so there's no problem there. And the chair will be selected from the members of the task force and asked to serve a two-year term. So we'll ask at the September meeting if the task force members would like to select a chair, and that chair will ask for 2 years. The working group can still discuss items, we'll present various items that you've seen in the past, and if there's a vote, they'll still have a vote on that item. Information will be channeled from SANDAG up through the PACs, as our regional planning committee, which is the PAC that will hear the information from the task force, and to the board. So there's not a lot of dramatic changes here, but it will align itself better as a task force than a working group. I know these are kind of a lot of internal structural changes, but for SANDAG, it's important. And I'm here to answer any questions that the working group members may have. Turn it over back to Chair Dina.
Thanks, Keith. Keep that simple. Appreciate it. And so before we open up discussion and suggestions from the working group, are there any public comments on this item? Please raise your hand. I'm sorry, Courtney, are there any public comments?
I don't see any raised hands.
Great, and it looks like we have, at least I see Councilmember Gasterlin. Go ahead, unless I'm missing someone else, but.
I don't think anyone else has their hand up, but Keith,
okay.
Could you clarify just very briefly what the difference is between a task force and a working group in this context?
Yeah, and you're kind of a unique group. And you're unique because you have so many elected officials serving as members. So a normal task force would be embodied and set up by staff with the idea there'd be a term specific, like we're going to work on one project. Like in your case, maybe the Delmar Bluffs would have its own task force, or it'd be like a topical theme, goods movement throughout the region. And it would be technical experts in that field getting together, discussing items of interest, and then providing input to staff, which then goes to the working groups or PACs at that point in time. You're unique. You have a bunch of elected officials who like to meet on this topic, and we encourage that because of your experience. So in your case, a task force is going to have the same look and feel as a working group. You won't notice much difference in terms of how it's run. It will still have to be Brown Act. Under SANDAG's purview, that's kind of like, okay, it's more feels like a working group, but task force is for technical topics. So we still believe it needs to be a task force. I think in this case, Mayor Warden can summarize that last meeting, which he said, hey, it's got the same look and feel, it's just a name change. I think it's pretty much a good representation of what we're doing here. It's just a name change on here. Working group becomes a task force.
So I wonder if we might want to make sure that our charter here recognizes the need to define goals and to aspire to fulfill them. And I would put sand preservation on all our beaches regionally as one of those goals. Recognition that we have two different littoral cells or littoral cells in our region. One goes from Oceanside to La Jolla Shores. And I don't know the name of the littoral that Serge is in the middle of. Mayor Dedina, maybe you know your littoral?
Uh-oh, now I'm failing. I don't know what our literal cell is.
Okay,
Is it
so
Silver
here
Strand? I
is
think it,
Coronado.
wait. Is it the Silver Strand literal cell? It may be.
Yeah.
I could be wrong.
And to point out that we have these regional umbrellas that we can work in, and principles that work in each littoral cell for sand preservation may work in both, and they may be different. So comparing and contrasting what works in the different cities, the different jurisdictions, the different regions. I'd like to see that explicit here. And the goal driven, I would see that as the difference between a task force and a working group. You know, working group are kind of like given stuff, we work on it. Task force, let's make it happen.
I like it. We can definitely incorporate that.
Great. Councilmember Bush.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's kind of, I have a similar question. So it seems like this is purely semantics, but I feel like, and I've heard that Sandag is kind of evaluating all, working groups. And so, and I'm sure Bayshore Bikeway Committee, I think that makes sense to do that. Because a lot of the items that we review aren't action items. So I think I understand that. There've been, discussions of even like eliminating that because of the staff time and resources. And I think I don't want to speak for everyone, but I feel like sometimes that's like, we'll have knee-jerk reactions to like oppose it right away. And I just want to hear like, and provide a, I guess, safe space for staff to see kind of what, the challenges are sometimes. Like, is it a question of resources? Because, staff time is valuable too. And if in these, they're just kind of these education sessions or coordinating sessions, maybe we don't need to have as many staffers or time or as much. So I just want us to have like an open dialogue about that too. And I feel like I'm not really understanding if it's just semantics, then that's fine. But I feel like there might be more to it.
Let me address the larger issue and then discuss specifically for shoreline preservation. So the larger issue is about the time it takes for working groups to meet, the time before it takes in terms of having to go through the Brown Act process, the cost it takes in terms of moving through that process for working groups, and the lack of flexibility you have when you have such a working group. So we went to the executive committee in January. We had a discussion and some analysis we worked on a prior year. And in that was $100,000 worth of staff time for the working groups. There's 26 working groups, right, that were established in Sandag. Many of those working groups lacked focus. Their charters were old and outdated. They no longer actually met on anything important. And a lot of the working group members themselves were getting frustrated in terms of participating if it wasn't anything relevant.
Yes.
Working groups themselves talk about policy. For example, if there's a mobility working group we set up, it talks about mobility issues. How do you implement mobility practices and good for everything? Task force, on the other hand, are really project specific or technical specific. For example, you mentioned the Bayshore Bikeway. That's a task force in the Sandag's world that says we need to meet on a project. And when that project ends, the task force ends. It doesn't go on and on and on. For example, our energy working group, there's a lot of frustration. It was kind of met its purpose. And the information that was being brought to them was no longer relevant, and they had problems meeting quorum. Now, going forward specifically on the Shoreline Preservation Task Force. Shoreline Preservation, this group's been meeting since the 80s, and it's still a relevant topic. We still meet quarterly. We have good discussion items, but we're really focused around shoreline preservation, and whether that's sea lion resiliency and adaptation, or that's putting sand on the beach, or a combination of all these factors of how we as a region become more resilient to sea level rise and climate change. That still is a relevant, we still need a task force to discuss those items. So as we're evaluating all the working groups, some working groups will go away, some working groups will be remained, and some working groups like the Shoreline Preservation Working Group is more akin to be a task force itself. It's very common in terms of Sandag going forward, making a task force that are technical in nature and keeping the working groups for larger policy items.
Got it. Real quick, I just follow up to that, Keith. That's great. It gives me more info. So thank you so much for that. What is the efficiency? So you described, working groups. There's a lot of staff before and after, and I still don't. That part I don't understand. The goal, so I think shoreline preservation, I agree, is a much different goal than, for example, Bayshore Bikeway. That is a project, so that part makes sense. And Bayshore Bikeway is nearing completion, so we might see the end of that. That makes sense. Shoreline preservation is only continuing to get worse with climate change, so it's going to continue to be a worse and worse issue that needs to be taken more seriously, to be honest. But but the staff time, how is changing it from a working group to a task force? What is the savings or efficiency with staff time?
For this specific working group, there would be no efficiency saved.
Got it.
It's just a
Understood.
name change, and then it lines itself more with how traditionally Sandag is talking with the nomenclature. For
Understood.
other
But for
working
others,
groups,
in the
obviously-
other working groups, it's a different story.
Yep.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Councilmember Donovan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Keith, is there a specific committee or working group that we will report up through or provide recommendations to? Is that identified, or it looked to me like in the document, it just says we'll provide Sandag input. It wasn't very specific. I was just wondering what you guys thought we were going to report, who we would report to.
So a task force by definition gives input to staff, which then in this case, we would bring it through our regional planning task force committee. So regional planning committee would be the task or the committee that this information would go up through to the board. So no change in that regards.
Thank you. You might want to put that in the document as well.
Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there additional comments from members?
I do not see any other raised hands, Chair.
Great. In terms of the charter, Mayor Gastelum and then just Courtney and Keith, I agree. Sand preservation or sand management is an issue, but we do have Chula Vista and National City on the task force, and I think the
Right.
issue of shoreline preservation and adaptation, it was something that was explicitly addressed when we added Chula Vista National City. It's understanding that these are issues they were facing as well. So I'm not sure if we include that in there or how that's going to work.
I
but-
think it'd be great to include these because it empowers us to push on them.
Right.
And
Okay.
I agree, so climate change, flooding risk, risk of flooding, not only from the ocean, but, storms.
We agree.
Yeah, and I think that adds the element to this really sort of issue not we're starting to address, but then that's something that really came up to me when we were a few years ago. We were looking at all the lagoons in North County and just the issue of flooding, in the lagoons, right, and coastal, and sea level rise there as well. So I think that fits into more of the shoreline preservation adaptation piece
Yeah.
as well.
And we might want to add as another explicit goal, if you will, clean water, clean water in the oceans, clean water in the rivers.
I think we agree with you on the resiliency issue. We especially was highlighted when we looked at the trolley system, and the sea level rise
Right.
will affect the trolley system in the South Bay in the cities of Chula Vista and National City. And that was something that we all have to work on together in terms of adaptation.
Right. Okay. Good. Are there any additional questions or comments? Make sure we don't miss anybody. Perfect. Okay, we'll move on then if that's okay. Looks like we don't have to make any votes. It's just informational and getting feedback. Is that correct? So make sure great. Okay. Well, thanks everybody. We appreciate it, Keith and Courtney and the members for the great suggestions. And now we'll move on to item number 5, exciting stuff. And that's potential regional beach sand project 3. It's like an album, right? Number 3. We're not to 4 like Led Zeppelin yet, but maybe we'll get there. Keith will present an overview of past regional beach sand projects and potential funding opportunities for a future regional beach sand project. Take it away, Keith.
Thanks. I like the idea of a cover album. That's what we need to have.
That's a great idea. Right, there you go.
Plus 4 will be IV, and that may be appropriate also.
Well, we've got great beach pictures and behind us. We got even Mike's got his lagoon photo there too as well. So anyway.
I like that. Lauren will bring up the PowerPoint for us. Item 5 in today's agenda is a discussion and possible action for the working group related to the 3rd potential regional beach sand project 3. This is a continuation of our larger discussion on how the region can become more resilient to sea level rise and understanding how regional beach sand projects can fit into this idea of nature-based climate solutions in terms of creating things that help adapt to sea level rise or at least manage sea level rise from a nature-based perspective. As background, you may recall that Sandag has facilitated 2 regional beach sand projects for the last 20 years and has coordinated biannual shoreline monitoring that helps the region understand where the sand is and where it's moving to. On a side note, we received an email this last week from Coastal Frontiers that the spring 2022 beach profile surveys will schedule this week or next week, depending on the size of the surf. So they're starting up with their springtime surveying work. So the last couple months, we've had a lot of discussion, and especially in the newspapers, about another regional beach sand project. So today we wanted to lay out a pathway to get to the Regional 3 beach sand project and discuss how we get funding for that. So Lauren's brought up the slide here. You can go back one slide, Lauren. So at your March meeting, a former Sandag staff member, Shelby Tucker, who was a project manager for the Regional Beach Sand Project 2, presented lessons learned from that project. And just as you remember, maybe the Regional Beach Sand 1 project was done in 2001. It cost $18 million. It put 2.1 million cubic yards of sand on the beach, 12 beaches in 7 cities. It was followed up 11 years later with the Regional Beach Sand 2 projects, which cost $26 million, put 1.5 million cubic yards of sand on 8 beaches in 5 cities. So lessons learned, we learned a lot of lessons from those projects. One of the things we learned was the high cost of just getting dredge into the region. It cost us $5 million to mobilize a dredge for San Diego, and that dredge had to actually come from the East Coast and had to go through the Panama Canal just to get to San Diego. I'm really encouraged right now. I've heard the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has planned to have a hopper dredge stationed on the West Coast, which will help reduce cost overall our dredge mobilization for future projects. In both projects, local jurisdictions paid for the upfront planning, feasibility, and economic analysis. These local funds were then leveraged with State Department of Boating and Waterways and federal funds from the Department of Defense for the engineering construction of the actual larger projects. So today we want to talk about what's the pathway forward to the Regional Beach Sand 3 project. Next slide. So based upon the past 2 Regional Beach Sand projects, Sandag has identified 3 phases and associated cost for the Regional Beach Sand 3 project. The first phase is an update to the 2017 study for the feasibility and economic analysis. And that serves as a foundation for our future grant request for implementation of phase 2 and 3. Phase 2 would be an investigation in the amount of sand located offshore, in the borrow sites, as we call them, and the design and preliminary engineering for a phase 3 project. The third phase would be the final engineering, construction, and post-monitoring for a kind of sand placed on the beaches. So we have some good information here. We have a good pathway. The cost of phase 1 is $200,000. There's a scope of work and a budget for phase 1 provided as attachment to the staff report. Phase 1 would help define the cost of phase 2 and phase 3. But for planning purposes for today, based upon the Regional Beach Sand 2 project, we're estimating those costs for phase 2 would be $3 million and $37 million for phase 3. If we can get phase 1 funding, we are more likely to attract phase 2 and 3 funding. This is the same strategy that was used in the prior beach sand project, and they were successful. So I want to talk about possibility of funding for phase 2 and 3, and then come back to talk about funding phase 1. So the larger funding, how we're going to get that, and then talk about how we fund phase 1. Next slide. So in the past projects, there's been both the state funding and federal funding. The federal funding has come from and last projects from the Department of Defense for some of the dredging that was going on in the San Diego Bay. And there are some opportunities for us to kind of explore federal funding. But the funding source that's most applicable right now has been from the State Department of Park and Recreation, Division of Boating and Waterways. And it's a grant funding source called the Erosion Control and Public Beach Restoration Grant Program. Since our last working group meeting, Courtney and I have reached out to Casey Catwell of the State Parks Division of Boating and Waterway to learn more about this grant program. So as I mentioned before, the majority of the state fundings for the Regional Beach Sand 2 projects came from this source of grant. 85% of the funding for construction and engineering came from the state through this program, and 15% from the local jurisdictions. I also believe the cities of Encinitas and Solana Beach have received grant funding for their pending beach sand project from the same grant fund. The application and process to get funding is actually long. In this case, the application will come out this fall, so September or October, with the application is due this winter. But since these funds are built into the state budget, it takes 18 months between the time the grant is applied for to funding becomes available. So 18 months to embed it into the next cycle of the state grant or state budget, and then become available during that budget once adopted. So the upshot here is that funding from this grant program earliest will come from summer of 2024. But the timing will work out pretty well if we can get working on our phase 1. If we complete phase 1 this year, then we can use that information to support our grant when it goes through the state process next year. and move into stage 2 and 3 when it's awarded in summer of 2024. So my takeaway from this is getting phase 1 done is important if we want to be competitive for phase 2 and 3 funding, which is the bulk of the funding. For today's discussion, we've identified 2 options for funding phase 1. Next slide, please. So option 1 is for SANDAG to continue to apply for grants to complete phase 1. SANDAG has applied for 4 grants for this work already, and none have been awarded. We were offered a debrief from Caltrans in the first 2 grants to understand why these type of grants were not awarded, and it provided a lot of insight for staff, and I'd like to share that insight with you. So each grant is going to be specific, but from the Caltrans perspective, statewide, a beach sand project doesn't compete very well. And you may ask why that is. It's viewed, at least in the state level, as a Southern California problem, meaning Central and Northern Californians don't understand the purpose of putting more sand on beach just for it to go away every so often a period of time. So when you're competing against Central and Northern California projects, they tend to look at beach sand projects as a lower priority. The granting agencies don't like to fund projects also that don't have a long utility. In their minds, the cost is very high for a project that lasts 7 to 10 years. It should last longer in their minds. And I think that problem is that with changing narrative for these regional beach sand projects, it's not about building infrastructure, it's about maintenance. These are things that need to be maintained, just like you have maintenance of your roads, maintenance of your sewer treatment plants. The maintenance of the beach sands are important. I think Solana Beach and Encinitas did a wonderful job with this as part of their project, and they have a now concept that it's a cyclical process. You're going to need to maintain these things every period of time, 7 to 10 years. The final insight we got was it's easier to fund construction projects than planning and feasibility studies. And this is where we're thinking, well, if we can get phase 1, which is the planning and feasibility study, figured out for this project, it's much easier to attract for construction and engineering funding. So I mentioned for your reference, the scope of work and budgets for the Caltrans grants were provided in here. It's the same relative scope of works, but it's just tailored for each of the grants that we've applied for. For the next fiscal year, SANDAG will continue to apply for grants for this work. That's already part of our overall work program, and we're going to be doing that. But I'd like to present today an alternative to grant funding. Next slide. So as an option to try and get grant funding for this work, the local jurisdictions could fund the work for phase 1 themselves. That's the work for updating the feasibility study, updating the economic analysis, and being ready for grant award of grants to the Baltimore waterways. This is what was done for Regional Beach Sand 1 and 2, which successfully leveraged that funding for phase 1 and received funding for engineering, environmental, and construction. The cost of phase 1 is $200,000. If the 5 cities receive sand during the Regional Beach Sand 2 project wish to fund phase 1, the cost would be $40,000 each. Obviously, every city that adds on to that would reduce the cost. For example, if the 7 cities who receive funding for Regional Beach Sand 1 project were interested, the cost would reduce to $29,000 each. Next steps. So there is a current MOU with the 5 cities that participated in the Regional Beach Sand 2 project. This MOU could be updated for our Regional Beach Sand 3 projects. If after today's discussion, the working group would like SANDAG to pursue option 2, SANDAG would update the current MOU and reach out to the various jurisdictions over the summer to discuss entering into an MOU for a Regional Beach Sand 3 project and collectively funding phase 1. We would then report back to the working group at your September meeting on the results of these discussions. I have a request if we go down that route today, if we decide that that's the option 2 is something feasible, I would request that the working group member from that jurisdiction attend the first meeting with the city and SANDAG to help facilitate the discussions for a Regional Beach Sand 3 project. In lieu of local funding, SANDAG will continue to seek grant funding opportunities as they arise, and we will continue pursuing that regardless of whether phase 2 is funded by, or phase 1 is funded by local jurisdictions or not. Chair Jadina, that concludes staff's presentation. Myself or Courtney will be happy to address any questions you may have.
Just a clarifying comment, just a question, just to make sure members who may not, just the idea is that the cities would pay that only are benefiting from that project. So we wouldn't ask Councilmember Bush to front us money for a project that his residents would benefit from, but technically wouldn't be in the cities. Just make sure that's clear, right? Yeah,
SANDAG's perspective is if you receive sand, then you'd receive the benefit there if they're entering into MOU for phase 1.
Okay, sounds great. Okay.
Not to complicate things. I appreciate that. Not to complicate things on it too much, but the reality is we're one region. And so I'm not totally opposed to, my colleagues might think differently. So, but for me, it's like ideally, we should all be going to the beach. Like the beach is all of ours. So anyway, I don't want to get too much into that, but yeah, like I think the beaches belong to all of us in some ways. So
You're now the most popular person in beach cities. That's the first time anyone that's not in a beach city has said that. So anyway, but we won't hold you to it because we know the reality of local politics. But
well, yeah, so well, that's the local politics, but maybe there needs to be some kind of contribution. But let's, what does that look like? Like ideally, it's not as much, So, but we should all be open to that. I would hope.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Very leaderful statement and regional based statement. It's very nice. So we'll go to public comments first, if that's okay. I know Mr. Hastings has your hand up, so go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you, Mayor Dedina. And thank you for switching that picture. That left-hand point break was quite distracting. I'm speaking more just kind of over a higher level on this project, but also I think my comments will weigh into the budgeting of this study. Specifically, I'm speaking to the update of the feasibility study and economic analysis. I strongly urge this group to internalize the additional costs and impacts to coastal estuaries, such as Los Penasquitos Lagoon. I know Tijuana estuary was affected as well, as it relates to ongoing and more frequent inlet maintenance. Bottom line, I have budget to do it once a year. I don't have budget to do it multiple years. Following the previous regional beach sand projects, we had to open the inlet multiple times in subsequent years. So it wasn't just one shot. I think 2016 probably is the best example where we had to perform 2 openings and 4 emergency breaches, removing over 75,000 cubic yards of sand when our average amount is roughly about 32,000 cubic yards. During those times when I don't have money, those costs are borne upon the city of San Diego and state parks, who have to allocate operators as well as funds as they can. And it's not always easy. It's quite a fire drill, so to speak. So to be able to plan for that ahead of time, I think would be very beneficial to groups like mine, as well as the affected stakeholders. I've ranted and raved about this before on public record, so I know most of you understand the impacts to our sensitive plants and wildlife. That includes listed birds who basically get flooded out of their nesting habitat due to the daily inputs of urban drool into our lagoon. But I also like to point out the vector issue. During prolonged closures, our salinity rates drop to a point where Culex tarsalis, a freshwater mosquito, can breed in our lagoon as it does in other lagoons. Those numbers increase exponentially. County Department of Environmental Health has this data. And it really threatens to expose not just local communities of Torrey Pines and park visitors to West Nile virus, but it says they can basically fly within 2-mile radius. So in 2016, there were 2 human cases of West Nile virus. Whether that can be tracked to the lagoon, I don't know, but the data does show the lagoon was a hotspot. So these are the things we need to think about. When the lagoon can't get open, this is the reality we all face, not just me as a land manager, but to the communities around us and to the resource managers regionally. That being said, I really want to congratulate Sandag staff and for their support. They did establish the lagoon endowment that does give us our annual funding. But unfortunately, that money will not be enough if we move forward with beach nourishment and the impacts we've seen. I've worked with Hani Alwani Coastal Environments. We have multiple lines of evidence showing the sand is coming from nourished sites. So I would like to work with the management group if possible to really highlight this. I have worked with Greg Heron providing our summer reports, but whether that gets integrated into this feasibility study, I'm not sure, but I really think it needs to. That being said, I appreciate your time. And once again, I'd like to offer my lagoon's help, or my lagoon foundation's help in assisting this new analysis, because I think all these costs need to be internalized, because as long as they're external, they're going to be borne by other people who are not receiving the benefits of the sand and the tourism dollars on their beaches. And I'm happy to take any questions or comments now or offline from the management group. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. That's a a thoughtful question and important point. And that may go to what Mayor Sanchez had been talking about in terms of looking at this sort of lagoon openings and lagoon, and maybe even restoration projects in terms of these sand projects, and maybe a way to work on it regionally, which it's an important point. And then more importantly, I think really highlights the natural climate solutions element of these projects, something that we really weren't really talking about before. So maybe ways to look at that, and maybe make it more attractive for fundraising or the grant writing. So anyway. Are there any additional questions from the public?
Yes, John, I am now giving you permissions to speak. And John Conover, you should be able to speak now.
Thank you. I have a question. How is the phase 3 project going to coincide with the Army Corps of Engineer project with the amount of sand projected for phase 3, the sites that would be receiving the sand and the offshore sand available? How are they like dovetailing?
I think you're talking about the Encinitas and Solana Beach Army Corps of Engineers project.
I am.
That's,
you.
that's good. So whatever regional beach dam projects is envisioned, and as that feasibility study goes forward, items such as the regional beach dam project for Encinitas and Solana Beach project would have to be incorporated in that. For example, you can't take all the sand from one borrow pit if it's being used elsewhere. So that's all part of the phase 2 work, where you'd be looking at site investigations, doing your engineering, doing your analysis. But we're not there yet. All we are is a feasibility study. Is it feasible to do next project? What would it cost? And what are the implications, as brought up by the last speaker, for going forward? And how do you mitigate any kind of issues that you see?
Okay, so that will be looked at, but it hasn't been
That's
yet put in place. Okay, thank you.
Great. And so I don't see any other public comments. Do we have any other public comments?
I do not see any other hands raised.
Great. And so we'll go to public member comments. Councilmember Bush.
A question: does the staff recommendation or the this proposal does it in? I know that the maintenance is always going to be an issue. The sand replenishment always. But is there in this report or plan or an analysis what we can do to mitigate the long term? So is it more? I think Mayor Dedina talked about the natural replenishment. So is there some of that, so we're not so heavily reliant on the maintenance and the sand replenishment, but letting it natural? So whether that's even like the Sweetwater River in National City, which borders National City Chula Vista, a lot of concrete there. I imagine that is what causes kind of the long-term issues, even though that's not a direct outlet to, you know, the beach areas. So yeah, could you address that?
Sure, and a lot of that will have to be also incorporated into the feasibility study, which is where's the sand, where is it going, and how do you get more sand into the system? I learned it as a kind of a bank, which is there's only a certain amount of sand in the bank right now, and if you want to have more sand, you need to put more sand into the bank. So where that comes from, it could come from upstream. We've actually had studies looking at Lake Hodges as being a source of trapping sediment, or it could be offshore, where if it's offshore outside the thing that's going as depth of closure, you have to bring sand that normally not get to the beach into that area of on the beach itself. So analogy would be you have to add more money to the bank account if you want to have more sand on your beach. So to answer your question, Councilmember Bush, it would be part of a feasibility study to look at where the sand is and what potential sources of sand could get to the beach itself.
And then
an
Marcus.
analysis of which is the environmentally preferred alternative, what is the cost preferred alternative. I know it's always a balance between what's the cost, the money cost, and then the environmental cost, if you will.
So the constraints or challenges and the opportunities would be addressed in that feasibility study. Then it would go to a separate environmental document for construction.
Great, thanks.
And then just Marcus, the other element of that becomes again what Mayor Sanchez had mentioned was when it comes, it's Buena Vista Lagoon restoration project and how that plays into sand, because there's sand from that. And the great example of that is what happened in Cardiff and Santa Elijo Lagoon with this really brilliant restoration program that provided sand material for dune restoration and other mitigation work. So, you know, it was a big win-win. So those are all elements of that.
Awesome. So, and thanks for educating me on these, everyone. Appreciate it.
No, I mean, it's important because, you know, these are all things that are happening and, you know, in the end, it's sort of not an abundance of riches. It's just making sure we figure out what can get done and then how you deal with these issues that have been raised, especially when Mike's talking about, but also, you know, as we start restore lagoons, right? Councilmember Hensy.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a little bit more detail to the question that Mr. Conover added, and it's that our hope in possibly pursuing this third phase of regional sand replenishment is to supplement the geographic location that's missing from the Army Corps project. in Encinitas, which is from South Ponto all the way to Beacons. So there is still a part of our coastline that we're missing, we'll be missing sand. And then the other 2 points one other point I wanted to make, and then the last one is a question, is that in the last meeting, we discussed that a lot of valuable data, studies, and analysis is going into the Army Corps project. And my hope is that we can share that information with the third regional beach sand project so that we don't have to repeat a lot of the same studies and hopefully find some cost savings for that. And then the last point is that the dredge seems so expensive as this project cost. Is there not a way that we could share the dredges between Army Corps and regional beach sand if we can coordinate that closely?
Yeah, we agree with both those situations of streamlining the process by using existing data and also sharing the dredge with the Army Corps. Well, it hasn't been explored yet. It seems logical to have the dredge come down once and do all the projects and share that cost with the dredge that's on the West Coast.
Great, thanks. Mayor Sanchez.
Thank you. And I just wanted to piggyback on Marcus's Councilmember Bush's comments, because I hope that, you know, each one of our cities is looking towards kind of a long-term sustainable process, and, you know, where the sand is going to be coming from. Is it going to be offsite, you know, and the regional projects, which we had 1 and 2, 2 really focused on the quality of the sand to ensure that it, you know, that it ended up staying longer, sticking longer. So it's the best quality of the sand, you know, how we can do this over time. And yes, if there's a need to invest in the barge, because I hear tell that most of them are on the East Coast, is that something that we can look at too? But how can we do this, you know, as we, not just for this 3, but as we go forward and into a sustainable process. Thank you.
Great point. Councilmember, Vice Mayor Kim, or Deputy Mayor Kim, sorry.
Thanks. I'm ready to go ahead with option 2, where there's some local funding to start. I think it's long overdue. We need it. So I'd make a motion if we're going to take action on it to do that, and then be more than happy to partner with Sandag with a first staff meeting this summer.
No, thanks for getting to the point. That's good. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then, but do we need to take a vote on this for that? I wasn't sure about that. We just get feedback, consensus.
Working group can choose to take a vote or not. You can choose just to say collectively, let's move forward and have Sandag reach out to those jurisdictions, get information, and come back in September.
Oh, okay, so thanks, Deputy Mayor Kim. Let's not table that, but let me just, I know Councilmember Becker, did you have a comment? I saw your hand raised. There you go.
It was raised before Councilmember Hensy, and so she actually did some things, but I need to clarify. So I do not have authorization from my city council to put forward $40,000 today. So I don't know what we're voting on. So I just want to be clear on that. And also
anything today, we understand the city councils themselves are the only authority to add funding, and we with Sandag could reach out to the cities. We'd like to have the Shoreline Preservation Working Group member attend the first meeting with us to set an item for the council for the summertime and seek if there's interest there to fund these projects.
Okay, and you're going to reach out to as many cities as you can. You're not limiting this to the 5 that you had from
7.
Yeah, I just want
to. On the second project, there was 5. So
I want to set expectations. We'll reach out to everybody who's on the Shoreline Preservation Working Group. To setting expectations, I'm not sure how much interest there's going to be for the other jurisdictions who don't receive sand, but I'm encouraged by Councilmember Bush's comments.
I am too. The other thing, just to go back a second, is I don't really understand what the quorum is when the membership of that the task force is, for instance, the lobster and the fishery. Are they counted as part of the quorum or no? Okay, it's just the cities as the quorum. Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Wait, Keith or Courtney, is the quorum just cities, or does it include like the port and the Navy? I couldn't remember.
So the quorum includes all the memberships. So
okay,
correct, that's everybody who's on that membership list itself.
Oh, okay. That's good. Okay. Councilmember Gasterlin and Councilmember Donovan.
Yeah, I want to remind us, there's no need for reminder, but I want to make sure it's out front. 4 of our 5 small cities in the Sandag area are among our beach cities: Imperial Beach, Coronado, Solana Beach, Del Mar. And $40,000 is an enormous amount of money the smaller your city is. In Del Mar, we quibble about $4,000 just because, we can't pay for everything. We also count who comes to our beaches. We have 3 million beach visitors a year, and our lifeguards do those head counts. They're really quite reliable, and they're backed up and validated by parking counts. So we count in 2 different ways, and we make sure that we do it right. Del Mar has 4,300 residents. So 3 million people are using the beaches, and those are not just visitors to the San Diego area. A lot of those are people who are coming back every day. They surf. They're coming from Carmel Valley, Poway, Rancho Santa Fe, Vista, Escondido, Santee. So I really do think that we need to keep the regional in this equation, and to think about, this is not just sand for each of our jurisdictions. This is sand for everyone to use.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And then we'll move to Councilmember Donovan.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is just a quick question. We're talking here about funding for phase 1. Is it anticipated that you'd be looking for local funding for the other phases?
That would depend on the granting agency. In the past, the Department of Boating and Waterways required a 15% match from the local governments, which was still a good deal in terms of they providing 85% of the source of funds.
So we need to keep that in mind as well down the line.
Yep.
Thanks.
As we move forward to working group meetings in the fall, we'll present to you the grant opportunities for the Department of Boating and Waterways, and we'll have a conversation about that as well.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Kim, did you have your hand up again? I saw your hand raised, but I wasn't sure.
No, that's okay.
Good. Okay. And no, I think these are all really good comments. I can't speak for my council either. And I know it's a long time ago, before I was elected, that we allocated the monies for the project too. But it sounds like, I just want to make sure I'm not speaking out of turn, but it sounds like there is interest in moving forward and exploring this idea of local funding for the first phase of the sort of preliminary study. Is that correct? I just want to make sure that.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good.
And then
these
Mayor
will all be-
Dedina, I'm so sorry
Go
to
ahead, no, go
interrupt.
ahead.
We do have a public comment.
Oh, go ahead.
Waiting right now. And Matt Caulfield, I have now made you
Oh, good. I'm sorry.
able to speak.
Okay.
And I believe you're still muted, Matt.
Matt, you can go ahead, but you're muted.
I'm sorry about that. It's really been overtaken by events, but I just wanted you all to know that the notice of this meeting was quite confusing, and an awful lot of people are not attending the meeting, the public that I represent, Save Oceanside Sand. What you're doing is simply wonderful. I can't tell you how much we appreciate the efforts you're making in this regard. And the other point I would just like to make is to Keith, and to let you know how helpful he was a week or so ago in spending an hour with us explaining all of this. So that's all I wanted to say, is that it's wonderful work that you're doing.
Well, thank you. It's all good news today. So that's nice to hear. I'm sure your representatives in Oceanside are very happy to hear that. So anyway, any other comments or questions? This is why it's nice to sometimes be in person. I think for the next meeting, hopefully we can do that, because these are the kind of discussions it's really nice to be in person and to make these projects work. Definitely a lot of back and forth, give and take, and really good discussion. And you see that at the live meetings for those of you who hadn't attended them, and things that Mike are bringing up. And I know others like Chris Webb will chime in, and all the cities. It's going to be great, robust discussion and really important stuff. But more importantly, definitely a lot of learning that went on in the last 2 projects. So from my perspective, I know Keith gets tired of me saying this, but the natural climate solutions component of it, I think, is really critical, something that wasn't emphasized and something that's clearly important as we look for state and federal funding. especially in, I think for California. And then number two, I know what we learned in IB is when we were doing the stakeholder engagement. I know Chris Webb was there on that. I'm not sure, Keith, if you were, it was Shelby, but just a discussion of potentially surf enhancement really makes a difference. I know that'll be a big deal in Oceanside and other cities. It always is, but the more we can frame that, and I know we worked really close with our colleagues at Surfrider on that. I wasn't in office then, but anyway, and then, right, where the sand comes from, and then that's very important, and how much, right? We learned in IB the hard way that it was probably a little too much. But, you know, and then also the lagoon closures, right? That something that was unexpected, you know, and the surf, when we dumped our sand, was out of the north pretty early and moved sand really quickly south. So anyway, lots of things going on, but overall, this is the best option we have in terms of moving more quickly to do things to protect our beaches and enhance our beaches, probably, given maybe some of the more constraints given by the Coastal Commission and others on harder structures and stuff. So anyway, so it's exciting. I look forward to hearing more things about wonderful projects from the public. Other questions or comments?
I do not see any more raised hands, Chair Tadina.
I'm sorry, were there other comments?
None.
No, okay. Or am I missing anything else? Hold on, I got locked out of my computer because I was managing the public process, so now I can't get back in it. I don't want, hold on.
During the meeting, Chair Dagina, and the next meeting is September 1st. For
Okay.
the Shoreline Preservation Task Force.
That's it, right? Are we done? Oh, wait.
Yes, the
Councilor
June
Hensy had
2nd.
another comment.
Oh, just to comment on our next meeting, I'm going to be going out for maternity leave for the months of August and September. And so I'm really happy that my alternate, my colleague, Councilmember Joy Lyons, who's here on the call and has been since she joined our city council, will be able to step in for me.
Well, that's great news, but also congratulations and enjoy.
Thanks so much.
And then I know, Keith, you mentioned, or Courtney, possibly doing it in one of the jurisdictions. Is that right? I know Solana Beach has a super cool community room overlooking the beach. One of my favorite public.
Happy to host.
Yeah,
That's a nice
that place.
halfway.
We could eat lunch there afterwards at the Nikki Cafe, but anyway, that's another story, or get some waves. Anyway, great, everybody. Thanks so much. Enjoy the summer, and thanks for all your look, a lot of going on in the world, but it's really nice when people commit to working together to figure stuff out. And I think this is what our public and our cities and our constituents want to see. And I think we are good at doing this kind of work. And it's, you know, two past examples of it working. So, you know, it may be challenging, but it's definitely worth it. And I really appreciate the goodwill that we saw here today and we have seen in the past. So I want to thank Keith and Courtney for that as well, and the Senate staff and all of you.
Thank you, Mayor Tadina. And I just wanted to remind everyone the June 2nd meeting has been canceled.
Okay, sounds good. All right, guys, thanks. We'll see you soon. All right.
Thank you, Keith.